Hello everyone, welcome. Let us begin a new story from the Old West. Let's go.
On the frontier, the hardest ground grows the strongest roots, and the truest hearts are tested not by hardship, but by the choices they make in the shadows. The wind in Lone Star Canyon sang a mournful song, carrying red dust over a land that had forgotten the taste of rain. Ilara Winters stood on her porch, her resilience forged in the crucible of loss. A year ago, her husband, a geologist with dreams in his eyes, had perished under mysterious circumstances in the mountains. He left her with this patch of earth and a chest of strange stones and old maps. That evening, as the shadows grew long with despair, she heard a faint moan. Grabbing her rifle, Alara moved toward the dry creek bed. There, tangled in thorny brush, lay a small Native American boy, no older than 8. His leg was caught in a bear trap, his eyes burning with fever and pain. Kneeling, Ilara saw not a foe, but a child on the brink of life and death. She calmed the boy with gentle words and, with immense effort, pried open the trap's rusted jaws. The wound was deep. She carefully lifted him into her arms and carried him to her cabin, knowing this act of mercy could be seen as treason in the nearby town of Golden Creek, a place ruled by the iron fist of a magnate named Corvus Blackwood. Inside, she cleaned the wound with a wormwood decoction and applied a poultice. The boy, who called himself No Dan, did not know English, but the gratitude in his eyes was more eloquent than any words. That night, Alara slept with her rifle by her bed, not from fear of the boy, but of those who might come for him. 2 days later, a stranger appeared at her door. He was tall and slender like a young cedar, his face stern, but his eyes held a barely concealed anxiety. This was Cale, Noden's older brother. He had been tracking his brother, who had strayed from their hunting party. At first, a wall of mistrust stood between him and Ilara. He saw only another settler, she a potential threat. But when he saw how carefully she was tending to Noden, his gaze softened. He told her they had seen Blackwood's men in the mountains, searching for something near an old abandoned mine. It was the same mine where Ilara's husband had died. Her heart pounded. She began to suspect that her husband's death was no accident. The developing trust between them was fragile, like a desert flower after a rare rain. Cale watched Ilara as she moved about the small cabin, her hands gentle as she changed Noden's dressing. "You have shown my brother kindness when others would have shown cruelty," he said, his voice low. "Why?" Ilara looked up from her work, her gaze meeting his. "He is a child." "That is the only reason I needed." A silent understanding passed between them. In that moment, they were not settler and native, but two people bound by a shared sense of humanity. Later, as Noden slept, they spoke of the land, of their losses, and of the shadow that Corvus Blackwood cast over the entire valley, a shadow that now touched them both. The next day, Corvus Blackwood himself, accompanied by the corrupt Sheriff Brody, paid Ilara a visit. Blackwood, a man with a predatory smile and eyes like chips of ice, expressed his concern for her safety. He insinuated that heathens were roaming the area and offered to buy her land for a ridiculously low price, supposedly for her own good. Ilara refused. Then Sheriff Brody, citing quote complaints, began a rough search of her cabin. She had managed to hide Cale and Noden in a hidden root cellar just in time. While the sheriff rummaged through her belongings, Blackwood's gaze fell upon the carved chest that had belonged to her late husband. "Your husband was an interesting man," he said in a silky voice. "He was looking for something that does not exist." His words were laced with a hidden threat. After they left, Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Cale emerged from the cellar, his face a mask of controlled anger. "He knows something," Cale stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "He is not just a greedy man. He is a dangerous one." Ilara nodded, her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but a dark picture was beginning to form. Blackwood did not just want her land. He wanted something that was hidden on it, or beneath it. Something her husband had found. Ilara and Cale realized they were bound by a common danger. Ilara opened the chest. Among the stones and old papers, she found her husband's journal. The last entries were alarming. He wrote that he had stumbled upon not gold, but something far more valuable, a rich vein of rare silver ore in an abandoned Spanish mine. And he was certain that Blackwood was watching him. On the last page of the journal was a strange poem that seemed like a nonsensical collection of words. Cale, who possessed the ancient knowledge of his people, looked at the poem and understood. It was not a poem, but a cipher. A map to the mine was encrypted in the form of a tribal legend. They began working together, and in the quiet of the night, by the light of a kerosene lamp, a spark ignited between them. She saw in him not a savage, but an intelligent, brave man. He saw in her not a weak woman, but a warrior in her own right. Their fingers would brush as they pointed to passages in the journal, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through them. One evening, as they were close to a breakthrough, he looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You have the courage of a she-wolf, Alara Winters. You fight for what is yours." She smiled faintly. "I learned to fight because I had no other choice." In that shared moment, the seeds of love were sown in the barren ground of their shared peril. A new doctor, Alistair Graves, arrived in town. He was a charming and educated man from the East Coast who quickly won the trust of the community. Hearing about Nodin's injury, he offered his help to Alara, condemning Blackwood's prejudices. He brought medicine and seemed to be a sincere ally. Alara and Cale, in need of help, confided in him. They told him about their suspicions regarding Blackwood, and even showed him the encrypted map, hoping for his assistance. Graves listened intently, promising his support. It was their fatal mistake. Dr. Graves was not who he pretended to be. He was a hired agent for a rival mining company, one that had long been hunting for Blackwood's silver. Graves made several visits, each time bringing not only medical supplies but also news from the town. He spoke of Blackwood's growing frustration and the sheriff's increased patrols. "You must be careful," he warned them, his face a perfect picture of concern. "Blackwood is like a cornered snake." Alara and Cale felt a sense of relief, believing they had found a powerful friend in this dangerous game. Cale began to teach Alara the ancient words of the legend, their heads close together as they deciphered the cryptic clues. The intimacy of their task, the low murmur of their voices, wove a delicate thread of romance around them, making them vulnerable in their newfound hope. One evening, when they were on the verge of solving the cipher, Graves brought them a soothing herbal tea. "To calm your nerves," he said with a reassuring smile. Soon after, Alara and Cale felt a wave of weakness and dizziness. Graves had added a potent sleeping draught to the tea. As their consciousness faded, the last thing Alara saw was the doctor's smile transforming into a triumphant sneer. When they awoke, the cabin was in disarray. The journal with the map was gone, and on the wall, crudely scratched with charcoal, were the words, "The mine is mine." They understood the terrible truth. Graves had betrayed them. The betrayal hit them like a physical blow. Graves had not just stolen the map, he had stolen their hope. Cale, enraged, wanted to rush out in pursuit immediately. "He will pay for this," he vowed, his hands clenched into fists. But Alara stopped him. Her eyes, though filled with despair, burned with a cold resolve. "No," she said, her voice steady. "We will not play their game. We will become the trap." She knew her husband. He was a meticulous man, a man who understood the depths of human greed. He would never have left his greatest discovery so poorly protected. The real secret was not on the paper. It had to be somewhere else. Alara knew her husband. He would never have entrusted such an important secret to paper alone. She remembered his strange habit of carving wood. She ran to the old rocking chair he had made for her. On the inner side of one of the armrests, she found barely visible symbols. It was the real map. The one in the journal was a fake, a clever trap designed for greedy fools. The fake map led to an unstable, abandoned part of the mine, prone to collapses. Alara and Cale understood her husband's plan. They set out for the mine, not to search for silver but to administer justice. Their shared purpose, born from betrayal, now forged their bond into something unbreakable. As they journeyed through the rugged landscape, Cale taught Alara how to move silently, how to read the signs of the land. She, in turn, shared stories of her husband, painting a picture of a man who was as clever as he was kind. He knew men like Blackwood would come, she said softly. He prepared for them. Cale looked at her, his admiration clear. He was a wise man to have chosen you. Under the vast, star-filled sky, the world seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them. The danger ahead was immense. But for the first time, Alara did not feel alone. She had Cale, and he had her. They arrived at the mine just in time to see Blackwood and his men, led by Graves, entering the tunnel indicated on the fake map. The doctor, confident in his deception, pointed them deeper into the darkness. Cale, using his knowledge of the terrain, blocked the entrance to the safe part of the mine, leaving only one path forward into the depths of the trap. From a hidden vantage point, Alara and Cale watched as the greedy men disappeared into the earth. They did not have to wait long. A deep rumble echoed from within the mountain, followed by the sound of cracking rock and terrified shouts. The trap had been sprung. Blackwood's greed had played a cruel joke on him. His men, digging in the unstable location, caused a collapse that blocked them inside. They were trapped. When the dust settled, Alara and Cale entered the main tunnel. There, in the light of their lanterns, Blackwood, realizing he had lost, confessed everything in a fit of rage. The murder of her husband, who had refused to sell his discovery, and the attempt to start a war. "It should have been mine," he screamed, his voice echoing in the suffocating darkness. Dr. Graves stood silently beside him, his charming facade shattered, revealing the pathetic coward beneath. Leaving the criminals trapped, Alara and Cale rode for help, bypassing the corrupt Sheriff Brody and heading for the federal marshals in the next county. They rode hard, the urgency of their mission fueling them. When they finally reached the marshal's office, their story of murder, greed, and a cleverly laid trap was met with initial skepticism. But the sincerity in Alara's eyes and the quiet dignity of Cale were convincing. The marshals agreed to investigate. The truth about the events in Golden Creek, a story of a conspiracy that had been festering for over a year, was about to be exposed, shaking the small town to its very foundations. The marshals arrived at the mine and arrested Blackwood, Graves, and their men. The truth about the murder and the conspiracy shocked Golden Creek. The mine, it turned out, was located on the border between the settlers' land and Cale's tribal territory. An agreement was made. The silver would be mined jointly, and the profits would go toward the development of both communities. In the end, it was not greed, but cooperation that brought prosperity. The immediate danger had passed, and the valley took its first breath of tentative peace, with the fate of its future hanging in the balance of a trial. Their future, like the land itself, felt full of promise. Cale turned to Alara, a gentle smile on his face. "Your husband left you more than a mine, Alara. He left you a legacy of justice." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had not felt in a long time. "And I found something more valuable than silver," she whispered, looking into his eyes. The love that had grown between them amidst danger and uncertainty was the true treasure. It was a love that had bridged two worlds, strong enough to build a new future. For a moment, they allowed themselves to believe the fight was over, that peace had finally come to the valley. The sun set over Lone Star Canyon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The wind no longer sang a mournful song. Instead, it whispered a promise of new beginnings. As they stood on the ridge, two people from different worlds united as one, they watched the marshals lead the prisoners away. Golden Creek was quiet, holding its breath. The arrest of its most powerful man had left a vacuum. Justice had been served, but Alara felt a flicker of unease. Blackwood was a symptom of a deeper greed. She wondered if cutting off the head of the snake was enough to kill it, or if another would simply grow in its place. The battle was won, but the war for the valley's soul had just begun. Alara and Cale traveled to Golden Creek to prepare for the trial. The town was a powder keg of suspicion and fear. Some townsfolk, who had benefited from Blackwood's cruel reign, viewed Alara with open hostility. Whispers followed her down the main street, and old acquaintances now averted their eyes. Cale felt the weight of 100 glares, the old, bitter prejudice resurfacing now that the common enemy was in chains. He stood by Alara's side, his presence a silent challenge to the town's bigotry, but the tension between them and the community was a palpable, suffocating force. They were witnesses for the prosecution, but they felt like the accused. The trial began. Blackwood's defense lawyer, a cunning man named Sterling, immediately went on the attack. He painted Ilara as a desperate widow who conspired with a savage to steal Blackwood's rightful claim. He twisted their every word, portraying their heroism as opportunism. "So you, a lone woman, just happened to find this lost boy? And then his handsome brother appeared? And together you found a secret mine? It sounds more like a romance novel than testimony," Sterling sneered. The crowd in the courtroom murmured, the seeds of doubt expertly planted. Ilara felt a flush of anger and humiliation. When Ilara took the stand, Sterling's questions were like surgical strikes. He tried to portray her relationship with Cale as a scandalous affair that questioned her loyalty to her late husband. "Were you not lonely, Mrs. Winters? Did this man offer you comfort that you were missing?" he asked, his voice dripping with insinuation. The psychological pressure was immense. Ilara looked at the jury, then at Cale, whose face was a stone mask hiding a storm of fury. With a deep breath, she answered, her voice clear and strong. "He offered me justice, a concept you and your client seem unfamiliar with." Then Cale testified. Sterling bombarded him with condescending questions about his people's beliefs, attempting to paint him as an unreliable, superstitious heathen. "Tell us, do the spirits of the rocks speak to you? Did they tell you where the silver was?" Cale remained calm, his dignity a shield against the lawyer's venom. He spoke of his people's respect for the land and of the crimes he had witnessed Blackwood's men commit. His quiet strength and unwavering gaze impressed the federal marshals and the judge, but the faces on the jury remained unreadable. The fate of the valley rested on whether they would see the truth or believe the lies. Blackwood and Graves were found guilty, a verdict that was a hollow victory. The rival company, Northridge Mining, saw its opening. The very next week, Sterling, the defense lawyer, announced he was staying in town. He was no longer a lawyer, but a representative of Northridge, here to help Golden Creek recover. He was impeccably dressed, coldly polite, and his eyes held the same predatory gleam as Blackwood's. He promised prosperity and order, but Ilara and Cale knew he was a wolf in fine clothing. The true threat had not been defeated, it had merely changed its face. Sterling began to expertly sow discord. He offered high-paying jobs at a new company office, but only to settlers. He hosted town gatherings from which Cale's people were implicitly excluded. He secretly met with Blackwood's former men bitter about their lost power, and offered them positions as security for Northridge. He approached Ilara with a generous offer for her share of the mine, an offer couched in veiled threats. "A mine is a dangerous place for a woman alone, Mrs. Winters. Accidents happen. It would be a shame if all your husband's work was for nothing." A series of incidents began. A settler's barn was burned to the ground, and an arrow fletched in the unique style of Cale's tribe was found in the ashes. It was a blatant setup. Cale and Ilara knew it was Sterling's work, designed to shatter the fragile peace. But the settlers were terrified and angry. Old fears buried after the trial resurfaced with a vengeance. The trust that had been so painfully built began to crumble like dry earth. Sheriff Brody was overwhelmed, unable to control the rising panic and renewed hatred. The strain began to tear at Ilara and Cale's relationship. Ilara was pressured by the other settlers. "How can you stand with them when they do this?" one neighbor tearfully asked her. Cale saw the doubt returning to the eyes of people he thought had become his friends. "They will never trust us," he told Ilara one night, his voice heavy with despair. "To them, we will always be savages." An argument, born of fear and exhaustion, erupted between them. For the first time, the chasm between their two worlds seemed too wide to cross, and the love they had found felt like a fragile flame in a gathering storm. The joint mining operation was sabotaged. A critical water pump was destroyed, flooding a new tunnel. The next day, a sacred tribal marker at the entrance to the valley was desecrated with yellow paint. Both sides were furious, each blaming the other. Sterling publicly condemned the escalating lawlessness and declared the joint venture a failure. He offered Northridge's professional management as the only path to peace and profit. His trap was working perfectly. The valley was turning on itself, just as he had planned, leaving the prize ripe for the picking. Cale's father, the chief, urged his people to remain calm, but a few young warriors, led by a hot-headed man named Ronan, demanded action. Kale found himself caught between his duty to his people and his faith in Ilara. Their meetings became clandestine, stolen moments in the shadow of a growing conflict. "We cannot let him win, Kale," Ilara whispered during one such meeting in a hidden grove. "He is poisoning everything." Kale looked at her, his heart torn. "How can we fight a ghost who uses our own hands as his weapon?" Their love was now an act of defiance in a valley descending into madness. Ilara refused to surrender. She began watching Sterling's men. One night she followed one of them to a remote canyon. There she witnessed a shocking betrayal. The man was meeting with Ronan, the restless warrior from Kale's tribe. Sterling was paying Ronan handsomely in gold coins to create chaos. He had promised Ronan a position of power once North Ridge took control. The enemy was not just outside their gates. He had found a way inside, corrupting the desperate and ambitious. Ilara's blood ran cold. The deception was deeper and more painful than she could have imagined. She told Kale what she had seen. The news that one of his own had betrayed them for gold was a bitter blow. It was a violation of everything his people stood for. Trusting Ilara completely, he confronted Ronan. The warrior, caught and shamed, confessed everything. The poison of greed had infected him. This shared betrayal, however painful, solidified the bond between Ilara and Kale. The doubt that had haunted them was burned away, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. They were not fighting separate battles. They were fighting one common enemy for the soul of their home. Ilara and Kale knew they needed undeniable proof to expose Sterling's conspiracy. A simple accusation would be dismissed as lies. They devised a daring plan to trap the manipulator, using the traitor, Ronan, as their bait. Ronan, terrified of the punishment from his tribe, and seeing a chance for redemption, agreed to help. They approached the federal marshal, who had been watching Sterling with suspicion. The plan was not to capture a sound, but a man. They would trick Sterling into confessing in a place where the marshal himself could be a hidden witness. The stage was set for the final act. The plan was put into motion. Ronan sent a message to Sterling claiming he had discovered a way to drive Kale's people from the valley for good. He requested an urgent meeting to discuss his brilliant idea and demand more gold. Sterling, arrogant and convinced of his own genius, agreed immediately. The meeting was set for the place where it all began, the old, abandoned Spanish mine. It was a fitting location for greed's final reckoning. Ilara, Kale, and the marshal took their positions in the shadows of the mine's entrance, their hearts pounding in the silent darkness. Sterling arrived, confident and smug. "So, what is your grand plan, Ronan?" he asked, tossing a heavy pouch of coins at the warrior's feet. Ronan led him deeper inside, to an old assay office where a thin wall separated it from a ventilation shaft. The marshal was hidden in that shaft, listening to every word. Ronan made Sterling boast. The man's arrogance was his undoing. He admitted everything. Hiring Ronan, burning the barn, desecrating the sacred marker, all part of his calculated plan. "Fear is the most powerful tool of business," Sterling bragged, his voice carrying clearly through the rock. With the full confession heard, the marshal stepped out from the darkness, his weapon drawn. "Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy, incitement to violence, and attempted fraud." The look of pure shock on Sterling's face was a sight to behold. The truth was finally brought into the light. The marshal's direct, unimpeachable testimony was presented to the entire town and the tribal council. Hearing the words of a federal officer, the people saw how they had been manipulated. The shared shame forged a new, powerful bond between the settlers and the tribe, stronger than any treaty. The arrest of Sterling and the exposure of North Ridge mining sent shockwaves far beyond the small valley. The company faced a federal investigation that crippled its operations. Lone Star Canyon was finally free from the shadows of corporate greed. In the wake of the scandal, the settlers and the tribe held a great council, not as adversaries but as partners. They formalized their joint venture, creating a charter based on shared ownership and mutual respect. The valley was healing, its people united by the memory of a common enemy. The mine flourished. The first shipment of silver was a cause for a grand celebration that lasted 2 days. Settlers and tribe members worked the mine side by side, their children played together, and the old prejudices were replaced by shared jokes and genuine friendship. Golden Creek was transformed. It was no longer a place of suspicion, but a community built on the hard-won lesson that they were stronger together than they ever were apart. The prosperity they had all sought was finally theirs, earned not through conflict, but through cooperation. One evening, as the moon cast a silver glow over the land, Cale took Ilara to a sacred place, a high cliff that overlooked the entire valley. The world was quiet, peaceful. "My grandfather used to say this is where the spirits of the sky touch the earth," he said softly. He spoke of the future, not just for them but for their children, a future free of the hatred that had almost destroyed them. From a leather pouch he took a simple, elegant silver ring, smelted from the very first ore from their mine. "Ilara Winters," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "be my wife. Let us join our lives as our peoples have joined their lands." Tears of joy streamed down Ilara's face as she accepted. Their wedding was a unique celebration, a beautiful tapestry woven from the traditions of both their cultures. It was a symbol of the new era they had fought so hard to create. Standing before their friends and families, they were no longer just Ilara and Cale, a settler and a native. They were a living promise of a future where different peoples could live, work, and love together in peace. The wind in Lone Star Canyon now sang a song of hope, carrying their story across the plains for generations to hear.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. See you next time.